कितना पीरियड रहता है 15 मिनट एक ही पीरियड है ना 15 मिनट पर हमें 4 मिनट 7 मिनट लाइक आगे किया है तो फिर हम लोग 7 मिनट बात करो क्या Unnecessarily strong. I like this so much. अरे मेरे को दिख रहा है मेरे को नहीं दिखता नहीं है अगर यहाँ पर ठंड हो गई दिख रहा है मुझे दिख रहा है मगर ये नहीं है इसको दिख रहा है देखो दिख रहा है मुझे दिख रहा है और लाइक हमारे हाथ में है टिश्यूज है मेरे पास इट्स फन मैं पहले बार रही जिंदगी में अकेले जस्ट थिंक और वो कुत्ते ने देखे वो कर रहा है मैं इसके हाथ पकड़े रीजन हम कार के पास कार आगे की लोग क्रॉस पर थोड़ा सा वही पीछे खींचा मैं तुम लोग को वही पीछे खींचा तुम लोग जा रहे हो नहीं यार लेफ्ट ही अंकल लुट रहा है और मैं आगे को यू आर आओ देन भाई मेरे पहले हाथ में है पीछे है गाड़ी अरे अंकल रुके थे सबसे अरे तो ना हाथ मेरा लास्ट है तुम्हारी शादी दिख अगर हम लोग लाइक मतलब अगर ओ नो नहीं हमारा यार बबल भी खेलने हैं शूज में डाल के बैठे फिर कौन नहीं बैठा शूज में डाल के बैठे चल यार अब ये खा लिया कुछ नहीं होता फिर ऐसा कर अपने ये 4 5 6
7 8 9 10 11 12 13
14 15 16 17 18 19 20
मैं डैश नहीं कर सकता मैं सिचुएशन देता मैं बोल रहा था सुन ना मैम टू आई for how many
with the bag of
can I am feeling unbelievable बोल बहन मतलब बोल मैं सिचुएशन ढूंढना रहता दोस्त है
इन हस्बैंड मत करो वो तो पता
अरे
है
इनको एग्जाम में रखा
मैं दिखा दी फोटो इसका चल रहा है ठीक है ये करवा साथ रहता है सब हर साथ रहते हैं अरे अपनी पर एक सच है उसको ही उसको किस का
नहीं है उसका कुछ भी बोल सकता अरे नाम बोला बस आपके पास का को ठीक है मैंने सिर्फ नाम बोला उसका मैं उससे भी डर करूं क्या मैं एक बंदे बैठे चला क्या उसका नंबर 320 नाम है थोड़ा सा
यू सोहन क्यों ऐसे
अरे खा ये पहला बॉल आउट You are right.
भुवनेश्वर कुमार
अच्छा मुझे लगा कुमार भुवनेश्वर
व्हाट्सएप पे है किस पे
इसका फोटो देखना मुझे देखा मुझे
सारे कोई नहीं है मेरे अभी
हां है और
ये किसके फोन से होता है मेरा नहीं है मेरा मेरा सोच लगा मैं सिर्फ दोस्त है मेरे क्योंकि इन लोगों को नाम चाहिए था
तो ऐसे बोला
सच में बोला फिर मैं क्लोजेस्ट फ्रेंड सुपर है देखो ना हजारों लोगों पे
मैं पूछ सकता हूं देना बस मैं इससे बातें नहीं करता
मैं मदद आलिया बट
क्या चाहिए मैं वो हेल्प में what ये मत कुछ नहीं
दूसरे बात वो जो स्टार्टिंग में गया
ये क्या है
क्या है
सच हो सकता है सच सोहन का नाम लिया आपको सच हो सकता है
नहीं है देखो मेरा अकाउंट नहीं है अरे मेरा अकाउंट नहीं है
हां तो देखना है नहीं बात देखना है एजेंट कौन है देखिए किसको भेज रहे हैं कुछ
अरे देखो पता नहीं है सब मैं
ओ सॉन्ग
क्या है क्या
Wait, वापस
बस
अच्छा वाला मैं नाम आ रही नहीं आ रही
अभी आता है अभी तो कोई नहीं लगा हाँ दिखा देना तेरा बर्थडे का फोटो सबको दिखा हाँ दिखा दो
ये कब हाँ वो है अच्छा तुम जल्दी चली जाएगी हम लोग सब लोग
बड़ा नहीं पर ये कहाँ
भाई कैसे कैसे फोटोज आलिया भट्ट का भी और स्टार्ट होने के पहले बोलता है ब्रह्मास्त्र में आलिया भट्ट भी देख रहा था
आलिया भट्ट की एक्टिंग देख रहा था सुनना
हाँ ये इसका क्लियर नहीं है
नहीं है उसका मेरी दोस्त है
भाई मैं अच्छा फोटो जिसमें वो मुझे उठा दे उसने दिखा अच्छा फिर नाम क्या है सच का
वो इसको उठाती है
कितने वीडियो पता है क्या
देखो एसटीडी में ट्रूथ में इसने चूज किया हमने पूछा भाई वो नहीं मेरे बर्थडे में से मुझे उठाया था उसका पिक्चर है उसका जिसमें
जरूर क्यों क्या सोचा था
सुबह कल तुम्हारा बर्थडे है ना
क्यों ना बीच पास
So now we are going to continue with this chapter, endocrine glands. So already we were talking about some of these features. Endocrine glands, characteristics of endocrine glands, characteristics of hormones. Okay. Now we start with the different endocrine glands. What are the different endocrine glands? And we are going to learn now the hormones and the functions of each of those glands. What are the glands that are there in our body? You may look into the figure that is there in your book. What are the glands that we have in our body? Endocrine glands, there are quite a large number of endocrine glands in our body. Look into that figure to understand. Right from the anterior part of the body, we have got endocrine glands known as the pituitary. We have got the endocrine glands known as the pineal. We have got the endocrine glands known as the thyroid, parathyroid. We have got endocrine glands known as the thymus. We have got endocrine glands known as the pancreas. Pancreas, a major gland. Then again, we have got the adrenal, we have got the testes, we have got the ovary. All these are endocrine glands. But which are the ones that we are going to study now? We are going to study endocrine glands. According to your syllabus, we will be talking about the pituitary. We will be talking about the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland. we will be talking about the thyroid. We will be talking about the thyroid gland, the pancreas, and adrenal. So these are the 4 glands that we are going to study. Let us look into the pituitary gland first of all. The pituitary gland. Hormones, functions, and abnormality. So these are the 3 parts of the chapter that you have to study. So when I talk about the characteristics of the pituitary gland, the features or the characteristics, let us talk about this. The characteristics of the pituitary gland. The characteristics of pituitary gland, then we have got the hormones. What are the hormones we are going to learn? And abnormalities, if at all. Abnormalities, if at all, related with this gland. So what are some of the characteristics of the pituitary gland that we are going to study? What are some of the characteristics? Pituitary gland is a small pea-shaped gland. It's a very small gland, very close to the midbrain, between the brain lobes. So when we are talking about this pituitary gland, so far the structural concept, it is known as the master gland of the body. It is a small pea-shaped gland. What is the location? Between the brain lobes. Between the brain lobes. It is very close to the midbrain. Close to the midbrain. Then, when we are talking about certain other characteristics of the pituitary, it can be divided into major 2 parts. The anterior pituitary, it can be divided into major 2 parts. The anterior pituitary, known as the adenohypophysis, and the posterior pituitary, known as the neurohypophysis. So this is what we are going to first of all understand, the basic parts of the pituitary gland. Look into the next figure that you have, the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland. Look into this particular figure. Tell me which page is it in your book. The anterior and the posterior pituitary, because the hormones also we are going to learn accordingly. The hormones of the anterior pituitary, the hormones of the posterior pituitary. So we are talking about the basic parts of the pituitary. There is an intermediate part also, but right now we are not talking about this. It's not there in your syllabus in detail. Majorly, you are supposed to understand the 2 major parts of the pituitary gland, anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. Now, when we are talking about, you get questions on this. Why is pituitary gland known as the master gland? Now, the pituitary gland is known as the master gland because this pituitary gland releases a whole lot of hormones. This pituitary gland is a very small gland, but it releases a large number of hormones. And these hormones can regulate, control the secretion of other endocrine glands. This can regulate the secretion of other endocrine glands by releasing a whole lot of hormones. Now, what are the specialized group of hormones that the pituitary releases? That particular category of hormone that we are going to learn also is known as the tropic hormone. Tropic hormone. We are going to come across that. What is the reason that the pituitary is known as the master gland? What is the reason that the pituitary is known as the master gland? Because it releases, because you may write down this question also, because it releases the tropic hormones, because it releases the tropic hormones which regulate the secretion of other endocrine glands. So that is the reason it is known as master gland. Now write down that question there. Why is the pituitary gland known as the master gland? Now, this is a common 1-mark question that you get in your paper. Why is the pituitary gland known as the master gland? You are supposed to use this word trophic hormone, that the pituitary gland releases a category of hormones known as the trophic hormones, which regulates the secretion of hormones from other endocrine glands. So that's the reason it is known as a master gland. Okay, that's the reason it is known as a master gland. Now next is we are going to come across the types of hormones that the pituitary releases. The types of hormones that the pituitary releases. The first type of hormone that we are going to talk about that the pituitary releases is the growth hormone. I'm talking about the hormones one after the other. I talk about the hormones. First of all, let us learn this way. Let us learn the hormones of the anterior pituitary. That's easier. Hormones of anterior pituitary. Which are the hormones of the anterior pituitary? The hormones of the anterior pituitary, first of all, we talk about the growth hormone. What is the next? We talk about the trophic hormones. Hormones of anterior pituitary. First of all, we are talking about the growth hormone. We are talking about the growth hormone. We talk about the trophic hormones. We are going to learn what are the different types of trophic hormones. The trophic hormones also we are going to look into certain types of hormones. We are going to study some few only. TSH. We are going to study ACTH. ACTH. We are going to study gonadotropins. Gonadotropins. Here for gonadotropins also we are going to study FSH. We are going to study LH. And we are going to study prolactin. So these are all hormones of the anterior pituitary. These names that I write are all hormones of the anterior pituitary only. Which are the hormones of anterior pituitary? Growth hormones. Trophic hormones under the category of trophic hormones. Now you know what is the role of trophic hormones. I already had written earlier. What is the role of a trophic hormone? The moment I talk about a trophic hormone, what it is doing, it is released from the pituitary, but it can regulate the secretion of other endocrine glands in different other regions of the body. So that is its role. So we take just 1 or 2 examples as per your syllabus, and then a whole lot of other hormones like the gonadotropins, which can be of 3 more types. Let us learn their functions and if any abnormality is associated. First of all, I talk about the growth hormone. What about the function? Growth hormone, you are always supposed to understand what is the function of the growth hormone. The function of the growth hormone is the overall growth of the body. Function of the growth hormone is overall growth of the body. Now, what is the meaning of overall growth of the body? As we are growing, right, the start, our infant stages, right, start from that particular stage, if an individual is having adequate growth hormone release, that the growth of the muscles and the bones will be proportionate. But if the growth hormone is not adequately released, then the growth of the muscles and the bones will not be proportionate. So if there's a deficiency, if there's a excess, what are those terms I have already written? Deficiency of a hormone, what is that word called? Hyposecretion. Excess of it, hypersecretion. So now, when I talk about abnormalities, now first of all, I'm only talking with relation to the growth hormone. Now, if I talk about hyposecretion, say suppose, I talk about is there any abnormality associated with the hyposecretion of growth hormone? Yes, if it is lesser than normal, then a person may be suffering from dwarfism, and if there is a hypersecretion, then a person may be suffering from gigantism. So these are just the reverse of each other. When we are talking about an individual in the growth stages, has a deficiency, then dwarfism. Now, what is the meaning of dwarfism? Improper growth of bones and muscles. What is the meaning of gigantism? What are some of the symptoms we understand? What are some of the symptoms? The symptoms would be the bone growth and the muscle growth would be tremendous, much more than what a normal individual should show. But if I talk about, now this is all in the growth stages, both this that I have been talking about. But if I talk about a hypersecretion in the adult stages, then this would result in a condition known as acromegaly. Now, what is acromegaly? Acromegaly would be a condition of hypersecretion, but not in the growth stages. It may happen suddenly at an individual, maybe of 20 years, 25 years. Okay, later in the childhood or late childhood also. So now what would that mean? Acromegaly, suddenly there is a oversecretion of the hormone, and this may result in disproportionate growth of certain parts of the body. That may happen to the hands, the facial region majorly, where we would come across that the growth in the hands bit unproportionate. The face is comparatively much bigger, and accordingly the height. So now it is an unproportionate growth that we understand. What is the meaning? What do you understand when I'm repeatedly talking about the word unproportionate? Unproportionate means if I talk about a person who is 6 feet, do we generally say that that person is suffering from gigantism? No. If the growth, by looking at a person, you can understand whether the body is proportionate or not. The upper part and the lower part and the facial part and the hands, legs, we can understand. But quite a number of times we have come across a person who is something around 6'2" also looks to be very abnormal. The body pattern looks to be very abnormal. Either the upper part is too long, the lower part short, or the lower part too long, upper part short, and the facial part will be too big enough. So that may be a case of gigantism. Acromegaly maybe the entire body may not be affected, only certain parts of the body. The hands may be affected, the face may be affected that way. And it would generally happen only in the adult condition. Okay. So that is about the growth hormone that we talk about. Now let us look into TSH. Now what is the role of TSH and what is TSH meant for? When I talk about the role of TSH, say suppose if I have to talk about what is its function, what is TSH meant for? TSH, basically the full form of TSH would be thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, can you tell me by the term itself what it should be doing? Thyroid stimulating hormone. What it must be doing? Thyroid gland, the thyroid cells. So, what would be the function of TSH? It would stimulate the thyroid follicles for the secretion of thyroxine. That is its role. So, what is the TSH doing? It stimulates the thyroid cells. We talk about thyroid cells as the thyroid follicles. It stimulates the thyroid follicles for the secretion of thyroxine. The thyroxine is a basic hormone of the thyroid gland that we are going to study also later. TSH, I said. What is TSH? Thyroid stimulation. Now, these abbreviations also you get in the paper to expand. In the expand section, you will get these abbreviations. Take a note, tick in the book. You are supposed to know these names properly. Thyroid stimulating hormone. Specific technical terms में mistake नहीं होना है. You may know school marks also for that. So thyroid stimulating hormone. What is the function? Stimulates the thyroid follicles for the release of thyroxine. Now here, when I talk about ये हो गया TSH. Is there any abnormality we are talking about? No, abnormality as such तो TSH की वजह से नहीं होता है, but for the thyroxine it may happen. So we are not talking about any abnormality right now. If it is ACTH now, if I talk about ACTH, then what? This ACTH, what would be the full form of ACTH? The full form of ACTH would be adrenocorticotropic hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. Take a note of the full expanded form. Adrenocortico, from the concept that the adrenal gland that we are going to study also has got a cortex and the medulla just like the kidneys. And this hormone is released from the cortical part, cortex part. So hence the name adrenocortico. So now that we are talking about adrenocorticotropic hormone. So this ACTH is a hormone released from pituitary, and it will stimulate the adrenal cortex. It will stimulate the adrenal cortex. I already told you adrenocortical from the concept adrenal cortex. Stimulates the adrenal cortex for the secretion of the cortical hormones, for the secretion of the cortical hormones, the hormones from the adrenal cortex. There's a whole lot of them. So now that we are talking about what would be the role of the ACTH, ACTH again, take a note of the full term, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and helps in the secretion of hormones of the adrenal cortex. Abnormalities we are not talking about right now. Gonadotropins now, next we talk about. What are gonadotropins? Gonads. What is the meaning of the word gonad? Gonads means reproductive organs. We are talking about certain types of hormones released by the pituitary which has got effect on the reproductive organs. Helps in the secretion of hormones from the reproductive organs, the gonad, the testes and the ovary actually now to talk about. So gonadotropins, what are you going to understand here? What would be the gonadotropins doing then? The gonadotropins are hormones from the, are tropic hormones. Yes or no? Are we not talking about the tropic hormones? This is also a tropic hormone. Gonadotropins are released from pituitary, anterior pituitary, and this will have an impact. This will have an impact on the testes. So gonadotropins, what is it doing? It will stimulate the secretion of hormones. It will stimulate the secretion of hormones from the male and the female gonads. From the male and female gonads. And that is what we are talking about as the testes and the ovary. Now, let us first of all talk about the first hormone, FSH. What am I talking about all these? These are examples or types of gonadotropins. What are the different hormones that come under this category? This is a category of hormones that I'm talking about, gonadotropins. So under this gonadotropins, there are some more hormones to understand. So the first few that we are talking about, number one, FSH. Now what is FSH? When I talk about FSH, the first hormone to understand, FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone. Now, what is this follicle stimulating hormone meant for? What is its function? The word follicle refers to a cell. When we are talking about the word follicle, it refers to a cell. What is follicle? Follicle means a cell. So what is this follicle stimulating hormone basically doing? This follicle stimulating hormone would basically help in the maturation. It generally helps in the growth and maturation of the testes or the follicle of the testes, follicle of the ovary. So what will this follicle stimulating hormone do? It will help in the growth and maturation of it will help in the growth and maturation of the follicles of the testes to form the sperms, and follicles of the ovary to form the ova. So basically, when I talk about this type of a hormone, remember which hormone I am talking about? I am talking about the follicle stimulating hormone. Roughly to talk about the testes and the ovary, there are cells which are going to form the gametes. There are cells in the testes which will form gametes. Now this basic concept with cell division also a little bit I had discussed with you. So now when I talk about this concept that there are cells in the testes which are going to form the gametes, there are cells in the ovary which are going to form the gametes. So if that is so, the process of cell division and the concept that we had studied in cell division chapter, but this entire process has to be regulated by a hormone, and which hormone is doing that? It is basically the FSH. If the process of, or if the hormone FSH is not there, then the entire process of meiotic cell division and formation of the gametes will not happen in the testes or not happen in the ovary. So the basic function of the FSH is that this FSH is basically helping in the formation of the male and the female gamete. To summarize, so what is this FSH doing? follicle stimulating hormone is basically meant for the adequate and the efficient formation of the male and the female gamete in the testis, female gamete in the ovary. Okay. Now we talk about the LH. What is the full form? LH stands for luteinizing hormone. LH stands for luteinizing hormone. So let us talk about this. Luteinizing hormone, when I look into luteinizing hormone, what does this do? This luteinizing hormone basically talk about, this luteinizing hormone also helps in the release of the ovum from the ovary. That is one of its function. A process known as ovulation that we talk about. Luteinizing hormone helps in the release of the ovum from the ovary. Now, when we are talking about the release of the ovum from the ovary, there's a particular term we will come across later. That is what is known as the Graafian follicle. I think it's not, is it mentioned here, Graafian follicle right now, or corpus luteum? Okay. So here I will talk about, first of all, Graafian follicle. You will very soon come across these words. The Graafian follicle, this is one. And the release of, Bolo.
Spelling would be G-R-A-A-A and one F, right?
G-R-A-A-A. G-R-A-A-A. Is it there in the book? G-R-A-A or double F?
Yes, ma'am.
Double A. Acha. Release of estrogen and progesterone. Release of estrogen and progesterone from the corpus luteum. Now, these terms, corpus luteum and Graafian follicle, you are going to come across when we talk about reproductive system. But as of now, let us try to understand. As of now, let us try to understand that what are these Graafian follicle and corpus luteum. These are parts of the female reproductive system. Basically, the ovary now that I'm talking about. The ovary, when I talk about the section of the ovary, say suppose the section of the ovary I'm talking about at a particular cell, a follicle and the ovum is getting formed there, it goes through a whole lot of stages and then results in the formation of a big follicle like this where the ovum has already been formed. Okay, so this is the big follicle which is known as the Graafian follicle. And now that the Graafian follicle is mature and the ovum is released, but now what happens to this structure? It regains its structure and results in the formation of a structure known as the corpus luteum, and this is the one which releases estrogen and progesterone in the female body, the ovary basically. So I am talking about that this follicle will result in the formation of the gamete. For this which hormone? For the formation of the gamete? For this FSH. And what will be the role of the LH there? The role of the LH would be the release of estrogen and progesterone from the corpus luteum and also the release of testosterone also. When we are talking about the role of testosterone, the testosterone is released from the specialized group of cells in the male body and those are known as the interstitial cells. Okay. So here I am saying that the release of the male hormone testosterone and the release of the female hormone estrogen, progesterone, that is completely regulated by the LH. Okay, and what will be the role of FSH? Formation of the gametes, the male and the female. So the release of estrogen, progesterone from the corpus luteum and also the release of testosterone, which is the male hormone, from a specialized group of cells known as the interstitial cells there. So this is about these two hormones. Quite often you are asked differences to write. Very, very important here. Differences to write between LH and FSH based on their functions. Is this clear? Anything you want to clarify? I move on to prolactin now. What is prolactin now? Basically, if I have to talk about prolactin, it's a female hormone. Prolactin is a female hormone. Now, what is this prolactin doing? This prolactin, I write up there again. When I talk about this prolactin, as I said, that it is a typical female hormone, and this prolactin would only help in a particular function. And what would that be? Stimulating the mammary glands. Stimulating the mammary glands for the secretion of the milk. But again, I said it is a typical female hormone, and that is only after childbirth. That is only after childbirth, a part of parental care we generally understand in human as well as in other mammals. Not only for human, for other mammals also. What we were talking about, hormones of anterior pituitary only. So what are the hormones of anterior pituitary? We had learned growth hormone. What next? TSH, ACTH, and then gonadotropins. 3 gonadotropins, LH, FSH, prolactin. What was the role of trophic hormones?
Stimulate the other glands to secrete
Their own hormones, to secrete their own hormones. So that was 2 abnormal conditions also we had learned. What were the 2 abnormal conditions we had talked about? Gigantism and this one, dwarfism. Acromegaly happens when? Hypo or hyper secretion in adults. Okay. Now we are talking about posterior pituitary. Now we talk about posterior pituitary. For posterior pituitary, what are the hormones? Let's check there. For posterior pituitary, when we look into the hormones, posterior pituitary basically has got 2 hormones here to discuss about. First of all, we are talking about ADH. What is the full form? Anti-diuretic hormone. Anti-diuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin. Anti-diuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin. Now, excretory system and the entire process of reabsorption you had studied already. What was the role of ADH there, if you remember? What was the role of ADH that I have to write here? What was it? ADH helps in anti-diuretic hormone. What does it help in? Excretory system is done. No, this you have to remember now.
concentration of fluid by water
Brings about reabsorption. So now, what was the concept of excretory system that we had learned? That after the process of glomerular filtration, almost about such huge amount of glomerular filtrate gets collected in the Bowman's capsule and it starts running down the PCT and the Lupo family. But does that much of the filtrate gets released out of the body? That huge amount? No. Majority of it, almost about 98% of it is given back to the body in the form of variety of ions and salts and a huge amount of water. So this process of giving back a huge amount of water along with its salts, a process known as selective reabsorption that we have studied, is because of this hormone. So first of all, what are you going to write down as the function? If I have to talk about what is the function of vasopressin, what is the role of ADH? You have to always write down reabsorption in the kidney tubules. So that is its job. Reabsorption in the kidney tubules and to maintain the concentration and the fluid state of the blood. So that we also understand that the adequate amount of urine that has to be released should not be something more than 2 to 3 liters at all per day. So what are you supposed to understand? What is the job of ADH in our body? The job of ADH in our body is to control the amount of the urine released, not to release excess amount of the water, excess amount of the salt should not be washed away from our body. And also the fluid state of the blood and the temperature, homeostasis, all these things has to be maintained. So in short we write, what is the job? Reabsorption in the kidney tubules. तो अब अगर ये reabsorption in the kidney tubules अगर अच्छी तरह से नहीं होगा in an individual's body, when the person may be, say suppose the person may be suffering from a hyposecretion of such type of a hormone. So if the person is suffering from a hyposecretion of such type of a hormone, then we are easily understanding reabsorption नहीं हो रहा है. And अगर reabsorption नहीं हो रहा है, then the person is releasing adequate amount of urine or a higher amount of urine. जिसके बॉडी में हाइपोसिक्रीशन होगा of ADH, the release of urine will be more or high, will be more or less, will be much more than normal. I already said, even if a person is releasing something little bit higher than 3 liters of urine per day, it is not a normal condition. 2 to 3 liters is an adequate amount that a normal healthy person would release. If a person is releasing something around 5 liters per day or even more, that type of a condition is known as diabetes insipidus. Diabetes insipidus, and जिसके सबसे important जो symptom है, that is diuresis, frequent urination and dilute urine. So that is the सबसे important symptom यही है, frequent urination, because ADH नहीं है, the ADH is not there in the blood, and the process of reabsorption cannot be carried out. Since the process of reabsorption cannot be carried out, so much of the water and the salts are released out from the body, and the person constantly feels thirsty. Urge of drinking water is also too much. So this is associated with ADH. Now next one, we are talking about one more hormone associated with posterior pituitary, and that is oxytocin. Oxytocin, another hormone. Now with prolactin also you will come across, for prolactin also in some text it must be written that prolactin also brings about uterine contraction. Roughly it does so. But oxytocin is the main hormone which brings about uterine contraction. So again, specifically if I have to understand oxytocin, this is basically a female hormone to remember. Oxytocin is a female hormone and it basically brings about uterine contraction during the process of childbirth. It brings about uterine contraction during the process of childbirth. So I said that prolactin also does overlapping function, but roughly lesser. Oxytocin is the main hormone which does this function. So we are already talking about the different hormones of anterior and posterior pituitary, and if at all any abnormal conditions to be talked about. Next we move on to thyroid gland. After the pituitary gland, now we move on to the thyroid gland. Now for the thyroid gland, certain features to talk about. What are some of the characteristics to talk about the thyroid gland? So first of all, where is the thyroid gland located? What is its location? The location of the thyroid gland would be in the neck, and it's understood that it is roughly in the shape of a butterfly-like structure, because the lobes are something like that. The arrangement of the lobes on two sides, and it has got a narrow bridge-like structure known as the isthmus. So now when we are talking about the entire structure is something like this. The entire structure is something like this. A narrow bridge-like structure there is, and some arrangement of cells and follicles like this. So this narrow bridge is known as the isthmus, and these are known as the thyroid follicles there. What are some specialized feature of the thyroid follicles to remember? The thyroid follicles, they require iodine. They require iodine for the secretion of thyroxine, thyroxine. Now we are talking about thyroxine only, but there are other different type of hormones also that the thyroid releases. We talk about basically 3 types of hormones that the thyroid releases, but now we are only talking about thyroxine. So here, when we are talking about that, what are thyroid follicles? These are specialized cells of the thyroid glands. One feature of the thyroid gland is that whenever we are talking about these thyroid follicles require the element iodine in adequate amount, the mineral iodine in adequate amount for the formation of their hormones. Then what would happen if the mineral iodine is deficient? If the mineral iodine is deficient, the thyroid follicles undergo the process of swelling and inflammation, and the release of the hormones also become imbalanced. So now we are going to learn also some deficiency conditions later, abnormal conditions later. So first here we try understanding one concept, that what is the relation between iodine and thyroxine? What is the relation between iodine and thyroid? The thyroid cells always can absorb an adequate amount of iodine, or always do absorb an adequate amount of iodine from the blood, and this is very much necessary for the formation of their hormones. Primary hormone is thyroxine. The primary hormone is thyroxine. तो अगर आयोडीन अगर एडिक्वेट अमाउंट में नहीं रहेगा ब्लड में, then what I already told you, this would result in inflammation, swelling of the thyroid cells, and the secretion of the hormones either would be too much or too less. So either of the conditions may happen. Then when we are talking about this, related to this, you also get a question that the people of the hilly regions are basically known to suffer from such type of an inflammation, swelling. People of the hilly regions are supposed to suffer from such type of a swelling. And what is that swollen condition known as? That swollen condition is basically known as goiter. That swollen condition of the lower neck. The lower neck becomes extremely swelled up because of the swelling of the entire thyroid follicles, the entire cluster of cells. And that condition, in just a simple word, we can as of now term it as goiter, swelling of the thyroid gland. Now, you get a question that why do people of the hilly region majorly suffer from goiter? Because in the hilly region, if you talk about the food, the soil, the crops are always deficient in iodine. Coastal regions are always known to have, the soil of the coastal regions are always known to have a higher deposits of iodine. So people in the coastal regions, why the severity of iodine is much lesser, why the frequency of people suffering from iodine is much lesser, is because the soil has got adequate amount of iodine. So the green leaves that we are eating, the food, the crops that we are eating as it is has got a small amount of iodine. Iodine is as it is a mineral element, so it is present in the food items in very, very less amount. You already know. If I'm talking about any type of a mineral, it's not present in a large amount as it is. So if I talk about the spinach and etc., the green leaves, etc., is there. But it is a myth that when we talk about that, we can we actually prevent ourselves by consuming only iodized salt? No, how much of the salt do we consume? So iodized salt is not only the solution to prevent from iodine, but people in the coastal areas, the variety of green leafy vegetables, etc., that we are consuming has a higher proportion of iodine as compared to the hilly regions. And on top of that, people of the coastal regions, we are also eating a variety of other different type of seafood. So seafood also we are eating. It's not so. So people who are consuming those shrimps and lobsters and etc., as it is, they have got an adequate amount of iodine consumed from them. So the chances of iodine deficiencies as it is ruled out. But talk about the people in the hilly regions. First of all, seafood is not there. Second, the soil is deficient in iodine. So whatever green leaves and etc. that we are eating here, at the same time, if they are eating there also, the iodine level is much lesser. So that is the reason that we are supposed to write here. We'll come across those questions when we do those questions later. Now we talk about the hormones. Now what are the hormones of the thyroid gland? The hormones of the thyroid gland, the main hormone that we are going to talk about as per your syllabus would be thyroxine. We talk about thyroxine, the major hormone of the thyroid gland, also known as T4, thyroxine, also known as T4. Now, when we are talking about thyroxine, what are some of the functions of thyroxine? Let us try to understand. What type of a hormone is thyroxine, first of all? Remember, I already told you that the hormones, what type of chemical composition they may have I told you already. I written down some features here. The hormones are chemically what? Chemically, what type of composition they may be? Proteins, steroids, and then amines. Okay. So I have been talking about the pituitary hormones so far. All of them are amines. Amines means what? They are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. That's it. And now that I talk about that, this thyroxine, what type of a hormone it is? Thyroxine also it is a protein. So as I talk about the hormones which are proteins in nature, they are easily absorbed by cells. That's also another thing that you should understand. If I talk about a hormone which is protein in nature, easily absorbed by the cells. Later, when we talk about the hormones, of like now we were talking about testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, they are steroids, and the process of absorption is a bit complex. Okay. Thyroxine, what are some of the functions? Let us try understanding the functions now. What are some of the functions of thyroxine? One very, very common and the most important function of thyroxine that you should understand is basal metabolism. Basal metabolism. What is the meaning of basal metabolism? Basal metabolism would always involve cellular oxidation. Basal metabolism would always also involve carbohydrate metabolism or carbohydrate utilization, fat or protein metabolism, all these. So now that I'm talking about what is basal metabolism, you should always understand basal metabolism basically means some major types of functions and cellular oxidation being one of the primary functions. What is the meaning of cellular oxidation? Cellular oxidation, that's a major function happening in our body. हर एक cell के अंदर this particular function is happening. Cellular oxidation मतलब
cellular respiration.
Cellular respiration मतलब what is happening?
The exchange of gases.
Oxygen is taken in.
Carbon dioxide is removed.
By metabolism occurs and carbon dioxide is
Oxygen is taken in and what is happening inside the cell? Release of energy, breaking down of the food. So if I talk about that part is cellular oxidation. Inside the cell, oxygen enters, breakdown of food happens, release of energy. So ये जो basic concept है, इसको बोलेंगे cellular oxidation, which is happening in every cell, which is necessary in every cell. Whether you talk about the process of growth, repair, maintenance, etc., etc., हर एक cell में ये process होना जरूरी है. And this process requires an adequate amount of thyroxine. That's the reason. That's the reason we see thyroxine deficiency अगर होगा, the process of bone growth, muscle growth, mental growth adequate नहीं हो पाता है. Okay. So now we come across. So first function is this that you should always remember. Basal metabolism is one of the most common function that the thyroxine regulates. Okay. What else? I talk about protein metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism. Now, what do you understand? Now, it sounds very simple. 2 words only I'm talking about, but these are elaborate functions happening in the body. Carbohydrate metabolism, if I'm talking about, now that we are talking about the carbohydrate food we eat, and then it has to be digested in the body, and the glucose has to go into the liver, the glucose has to go into the cells, then the glucose in the cells are getting broken down and release of energy, and then the excess glucose in the liver has to be stored as glycogen, and then again broken down, and sometimes this glycogen will get broken down to glucose. So ये जो पूरा process है of formation of the glucose and conversion of the glucose and utilization of the glucose, this is what we are going to talk about as carbohydrate metabolism, and the same thing for proteins and etc., etc. What is the other function of thyroxine? Another very important function of thyroxine you should always remember, bone ossification. What is the meaning of bone ossification? Maturity and growth of the bones. Bone ossification meaning that thyroxine is very much necessary for the entire process of calcium phosphorus absorption from the blood. Calcium phosphorus absorption, vitamin D absorption, and the entire process of bone formation and maturation, bone marrow formation. So ये जो पूरा process of bone ossification, that is also very much dependent on thyroxine. What else? We can talk about mental maturation also. Mental maturation, another very important function of thyroxine. Mental maturation. Say suppose, what do you understand by mental maturation? I talk about a 5-year-old, or I talk about an 8-year-old child. If you come across that the 8-year-old child is behaving like a 3-year-old or 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, can we understand? Can we understand? A 8-year-old child, a 8-year-old, 9-year-old boy or girl is behaving like her age or behaving like a 3-4-year-old. Can we understand or not? We can. No, by the behavior we can. I talk about a 15, 16-year-old child. I talk about a you will spill all the water on you. I talk about a 15-year-old boy. I talk about a 15, 16-year-old girl. Is he or she behaving her age or behaving too childlike like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old? Can you understand or not? We can. What do we call that word as? What is that simple word that we always use? Immature. So when we are not behaving our age, if I start behaving like you now, it will be so funny, no? So when we are not behaving our age, if you are 15-year, we understand a 15, 16-year should behave this way. If it is a 10-year, we understand. If it is a 5-year, we understand. If it is a 30, 35-year-old and I am behaving like a 20-year-old, no, it will be so immature that way. So that when we are in the process of growth, this hormone should be adequate, and not only during our process of growth, also when we are in our mother's womb, the mother's body should have adequate amount of this hormone, then only this will happen properly in us. Mental maturation. So mental maturation is a very, very important aspect which is very much associated with thyroxine. Otherwise, an individual may also suffer from retardation, mental retardation, okay, apart from immaturity. So these are some common functions, first of all, we talk about. Let us now look into some conditions, some hypo or hyper secretion conditions. So if I talk about hyposecretion, we are talking about simple goiter. If I talk about hypersecretion, I am talking about simple goiter. Now, what are some of the symptoms of simple goiter? Simple goiter symptoms are swelling of the lower neck, I already told you. And why I said this is also termed as simple goiter, also because इसके जो symptoms है, nothing very scary actually. Other than the swelling of the neck, the other parameters of the body are more or less okay. Can this be retrieved? Can this be corrected? To some extent. It can be corrected also with diet, with medication, etc., etc. But if I'm talking about the other way, if I talk about hypersecretion, say suppose I talk about hypersecretion. Now for hypersecretion, the first thing that we are going to talk about would be exophthalmic goiter. It is known as exophthalmic goiter. Now this is quite serious. Exophthalmic goiter, as in comparison with simple goiter, is quite serious. Exophthalmic goiter, when we are talking about, the individual first of all will have variety of parameter imbalance. Something like the person may suffer from breathlessness, high blood pressure. The person may also start suffering from some improper, say suppose I may also talk about kidney disorder resulting in some problems with the electrolyte balance of the body, that may also be there. So what are some of the common symptoms you should understand? Exophthalmic goiter, higher breathing rate, very common. Higher breathing rate, higher pulse rate, high blood pressure, improper electrolyte balance, protruding eyes, insomnia, swelling of the body parts, edema, swelling, the eye will be puffy, legs, hands swollen, puffiness is there, swollen body parts, protruding eyes is one, and on top of that, when we are talking about exophthalmic goiter, the swelling of the lower neck is common. Now, when I talk about, why are we saying that this is a more serious condition? I already talked about the parameters, the higher breathing rate and the pulse rate and the heartbeat and the protruding eyes. All these things cannot be completely corrected also. They cannot be completely corrected also. As in comparison with goiter. As I said, goiter can be to some extent corrected also. Now, next is when we are talking about some other conditions. Let us look into some other conditions of thyroid. Some other conditions that are the calcitonin, you may just put a cross. Calcitonin we are not studying. Some other conditions that we are going to look into. Let us come across. What are the other ones given there? I think Over-secretion, okay, for over-secretion, okay, cretinism and myxoderma. So this also we'll have to talk about. Cretinism and myxoderma. So these two conditions also we are going to come across. Now cretinism, what is cretinism? Cretinism basically helps occurs in children, growing stages. So first of all, you will always get differences between these two. Please take a note. You always get differences between these two. Hypersecretion, based on the disease condition. Difference between simple goiter, exophthalmic goiter. Often you are asked to write, so see that you write that properly. Now, cretinism and myxoderma, if I am to talk about cretinism and myxoderma, remember when we are talking about cretinism, I said what is the first property to understand? It basically happens in children of the growing stages. Roughly around 5 to 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, that's the age group generally people suffer from cretinism. And what are some of the common symptoms? Common symptoms would be improper growth, muscular bone growth improper, and along with improper growth, there may be mental retardation, immaturity, retardation also. So improper mental maturation or say improper mental retardation, any of the words you can use. Myxoderma, when we talk about myxoderma can also happen in adults also when we are talking about myxoderma, and here we are majorly talking about improper growth of the facial bones, hand bones, leg bones, and apart from that, some swelling of the body parts that also may be happening. But as it is, comparatively, when I talk about simple goiter myxoderma, the symptoms are comparatively less pronounced. Cretinism and exophthalmic goiter is one of the most dangerous to generally talk about. So this is about thyroid and the thyroid glands that you have to understand. The third type of the gland that we are going to talk about would be pancreas. Now let us talk about pancreas. To know about pancreas, the first thing that you should understand is that pancreas is known. What is the position of the pancreas? Below the stomach. Can be also written about the position of the pancreas. Pancreas between the stomach and the large intestine. You may get MCQs or some questions. Pancreas is present between the stomach and large intestine. Yes, that's also correct. Now we are talking about the pancreas can be considered as a endocrine as well as a exocrine gland. Let us first of all understand that the pancreas is considered as a exocrine gland because it has got the acinar cells. The pancreas is considered as an exocrine gland because it has got the acinar cells which secretes the enzymes. And now let us understand that the pancreas is also known as an endocrine gland even. It is also known as an endocrine gland even because it has got the islets of Langerhans. It has got the islets of Langerhans for releasing the whole lot of enzymes. So now that we are hormones, the islets of Langerhans, what are these? This is a cluster of cells. The islets of Langerhans are a cluster of cells. So I may talk about maybe a cluster of cell like this, which has got some cells something like this, some cells something like this, some cells something like this, and certain category of cells are there. Some cells are here, some cells are here, some cells are here, some more types of cells are here, and three different types of cells basically which may make up the islets of Langerhans. There are three major types of cells. I repeat what I'm saying. Pancreas is one such gland where you will understand that there are some mixed group of cells. Some group of cells are releasing enzymes. What are these group of cells? Acinar cells. But relating to this chapter, majorly we are interested to know about the islets of Langerhans. What are islets of Langerhans? It's a cluster of cells which are found in the sections of the pancreas. And this cluster of cells are releasing what? Hormones. Now, this cluster of cells, when I talk about, there are some cells, maybe I talk about, there are some cells known as the beta cells, and the beta cells are releasing insulin. There are one more cells I will talk about, the alpha cells, and these alpha cells are releasing the glucagon. Okay, and there may be another type of a cell known as the delta cells, and these delta cells are releasing the somatostatin. The somatostatin, is it there in your book? Just check. Huh?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
It is there, no? But anyways, we are not studying about this right now. We are only studying about the insulin and the glucagon. Only these two we are studying. So now, when we are talking about the insulin and the glucagon, let us learn about the insulin and the glucagon and the different types of functions of the insulin and the glucagon. Now, as we look into the islets of Langerhans, now take a note of this again. What are islets of Langerhans? A cluster of cells of the pancreas, the hormone secreting cells of the pancreas, which are actually made up of 3 types of cells. Especially you want to take a note of the beta and the alpha cells, insulin and glucagon. Now let us talk about the functions. When I talk about the first hormone, insulin, I talk about the first hormone, insulin. What is the job of insulin? How does it perform its role? So that is what we are going to study first. What is the job of insulin? Let us try to understand what would be the role of insulin here. Insulin helps in decreasing, or when we are talking about the role of insulin, decreases or lowers the blood glucose level. So that's the correct way you can write. Lowers the blood glucose level. Lowers the blood glucose level. How does it do so? That is what you have to understand now. So what are the 2 methods by which it does? So when I'm talking about that, the insulin lowers the blood glucose level, let us try to understand what is the mode of action, what is the mechanism that it performs. Something like when I talk about the entire process of, or the entire role of the insulin is something like this. Say suppose I'm talking about that we take some carbohydrate food, a slice of bread, a particular amount of meal that we take in rich in carbohydrates. So we have taken our breakfast or lunch rich in carbohydrates. Now what's happening? We take this food, the food takes almost about roughly half an hour to 1 hour to undergo the process of digestion. And now what will happen? The glucose will enter into the blood. In a period of 1 hour, the process of digestion is almost over and the glucose is inside in the blood, dissolved in the blood. So now, after our meal, if we go for a blood test within an hour, the glucose concentration in the blood should be high. Yes or no? The glucose concentration should be high. But after 2 hours again, the same blood test we go for, should the glucose concentration be still high? Something like, if I give a number, say suppose I have taken my meal and after our meal, a normal individual, after the meal is taken, within a period of 1 hour, the person goes for a blood test, and the sugar concentration is supposed to be, something around 150 deciliter per ml of blood, say suppose. So now, this is quite a higher number. But after, if the test is repeated after 2 hours again, it may come down to something around 70 or 80 deciliter per milliliter of the blood. Now, this is a normal range that we talk about. What I'm trying to tell you is that if we are taking any meal, whenever we are taking any meal within a period of half an hour to 1 hour, when we go for a blood test, the sugar concentration is always high. But after 2 hours, again you repeat the blood test, the concentration should come back to a normal. So which hormone is doing this job? It is insulin who is bringing back or lowering our blood glucose level. We may be consuming certain amount of sweets, yes. Within a period of 1 hour, if you, after eating 5 gulab jamuns and 3 jalebis, if you know that Diwali time is over, you must have gulped so much of sweets. It's not so, no, Radhika says so sandwiches. So now, what happens? Festive time we are eating. But if within half an hour, 1 hour we could have done for a blood test, we would have been shocked looking into the number. But are we to get scared? Perhaps not if our body is healthy enough, because this enzyme, this hormone is there to bring it back to normal within a period of time. But if it does not bring back to normal, then there is something to worry. Even after the blood test done after 3 hours, if the number remains something like this, then it is something to be worried about. We'll see how. Now we are talking about that. What is the job of this hormone? Insulin lowers the blood glucose level. How does it do so? It increases the permeability. It increases the permeability of the body cells. Permeability of the body cells to absorb glucose. To absorb glucose from the blood. So now, when we are talking about that the glucose after the process of digestion will enter into the blood, what is that process called? Absorption, no? By the process of absorption, the glucose will enter into the blood. So this insulin, once released into the blood, will increase the permeability of the body cells. Will make the body cells permeable, so that if I am talking about that this is the bloodstream and surrounding the bloodstream there are body cells. The body cells should be permeable, should be ready to take in glucose. Otherwise, glucose concentration blood में बढ़ते ही जा रहा है. The body cells are not able to take in. So, जैसे ही insulin is there in the blood, now I understand that insulin is there in the blood, then this glucose starts going inside the body cells and the concentration of glucose in the blood will be much lesser. So, that is the simple concept. What else? When we are talking about that, what can be the other method by which the glucose concentration, something like I am trying to tell you that the glucose concentration in the blood should be lesser. The glucose concentration in the blood should be lesser. What should be the other way? What is the other way? One is this, the body cells are constantly taking the glucose from the blood. What is the other way? The other way is the excess glucose can be stored in the liver in the form of glycogen. The excess glucose has to be stored. The excess glucose to be stored in the form of glycogen. And where should this be done? This should be done in the liver. So these are some of the pathways, or this is what the insulin does in our body. And ये दो functions के वजह से the glucose in the blood remains lesser. The glucose in the blood remains less. ठीक है? So now that we are talking about that, what is the role of insulin? How does the insulin? These are the points that you are supposed. What happened there? What is the confusion? क्या है confusion?
समझ रहा है सेक्शन
हाँ?
अंडर सेक्रेशन उसको वापस सेक्शन
कौन सा अंडर सेक्रेशन?
नहीं अभी समझ गए मैं वो पॉइंट पूछ रहा था जो रब किया
देखो कितना अच्छा है, उसने देखा और तुम समझ गए.
नहीं सुंदर है वो पॉइंट.
सिंपली तुम यूट्यूब में आके इतना तुम टाइम वेस्ट कर रहे हो. उसका खाली देखने का ही देरी है, एंड देन यू अंडरस्टैंड एवरीथिंग. और तब से मैं चिल्लाते जा रही हूँ 2 घंटे से, तुमको नहीं समझ में आ रहा.
समझा ये पॉइंट.
टेल मी व्हाट इज योर डाउट.
वो लिखा है वो
कौन सा तुमको नहीं समझ में आ रहा? रीड आउट.
ये ऐसे ही बोल रहा है.
झूठ बोल रहा है.
हाँ ऐसे ही कुछ बोल रहा है.
So tell me what was the problem?
I didn't hear properly, but alpha beta cell. No ma'am. Hey, I was first asking.
That time I was observing that you were asking, writing something. What was he writing? क्या doubt है उसको?
First point. And this first point I have written.
So why you have to ask him? Why can't you ask me? Okay. और ये चीज from the first lecture I've been telling. क्या लिख रहे थे तुम? लास्ट पॉइंट क्या लिखा तुमने? What did you write? Where was the problem?
वो हाइपर सेक्रेशन तक ही लिखा है इसका.
Hypersecretion of thyroid. उसमें कुछ confusion है? अच्छा, so what I was saying, you will get questions. How does insulin lower the blood glucose level? How does insulin lower the blood glucose level? These are the points that you have to write down. Insulin lowers the blood glucose level by doing this, increasing the permeability of the body cells so that the body cells can absorb the glucose from the blood. And excess of glucose, the surplus glucose, why I am talking about surplus glucose? Because every time, every meal we take in glucose, carbohydrate much more than what our body needs. So every time there is a surplus glucose in the body. So the surplus glucose, where will the surplus glucose go? By the flow of circulation, it will also enter into the liver and get stored for future use as glycogen. So these are the pathways by which the insulin will lower the blood glucose level. But I have also said that if a person is having a hyposecretion of insulin, if a person is having a hyposecretion of insulin, then this person is suffering from diabetes mellitus. This person is suffering from diabetes mellitus. A hyposecretion, the person suffers from diabetes mellitus. What can be some of the symptoms of diabetes mellitus? Let us try to understand. Some symptoms of diabetes mellitus. Number one would be extreme weakness, lethargy. Lethargy meaning extreme weakness. Then next is the person is not enthusiastic about everything. The person will have a progressive weight loss.
Diabetes mellitus is diabetes itself, right?
The common diabetes that people suffer from.
The high concentration of sugar.
High blood sugar. High blood sugar. तो हाई ब्लड शुगर क्यों हो रहा है? बिकॉज इंसुलिन इज लेस एंड ये दो फंक्शंस नहीं हो पा रहे. These two functions are not happening in the body.
So more amount of glucose is present in the blood.
Is present in the blood. So this concentration of the glucose in the blood being maintained at a higher level is very dangerous for the body, because the glucose is not entering the body cells, so body cells में energy produce नहीं हो रहा है. That's the reason the person is always tired and lethargy. And the person is progressively losing weight also. A person who is diabetic basically starts losing weight at an alarming rate, okay? Apart from that, what? Apart from, a major symptom is again diuresis. Diuresis is a major symptom. What is diuresis? Frequent urination. The person often feels thirsty. The person is always dehydrated. The person will also suffer from hyperglycemia. What is hyperglycemia? Excessive amount of sugar in the blood every time. High concentration of sugar in the blood every time. Now, apart from that, this is not there in your book. Exam point of view, only that much is enough. But this high concentration of sugar maintained in the blood for a prolonged period of time starts affecting the kidneys, starts affecting the vision, eyes, etc., etc. So this person who is diabetic for a long time is definite to suffer from kidney problems, heart problems in the long run. So this is there. So now, if I talk about that a person who is diabetic, what are some of the methods, measures to take care? Measures to take care obviously is when we are talking about medication. All of you have come across somebody in the family, outside friends, etc. You must have heard about that a person who is diabetic often takes medication. Now, what is this medication doing? The medication is bringing about dysfunctions. The medication is bringing about dysfunction so that the blood glucose concentration is controlled in the blood. But quite a number of times we'll come across people who are suffering from diabetes for a long time become resistant to medicines. The medicines doesn't work. At that time, what they have to take? They have to take insulin injections. They have to take insulin injections. These are called insulin shots. They have to take insulin injections. Now, what are these insulin injections doing? Again, these insulin injections, when given, the person will start, the insulin starts entering into the blood and again brings about dysfunctions. So now, if this insulin injections has to be done or taken in a well-monitored manner. Say suppose a person who is on medication may simply take the medicine after breakfast, after dinner, etc. They basically are advised to take after breakfast. So now when we are talking about or before breakfast, so if a person is on medication, the person is comparatively less careful or maybe less careful as compared to a person who is on insulin. If a person is on insulin, first of all, the blood sugar level has to be checked. Then the person has to decide how much of the insulin to be administered. Something about 2 units or 4 units or 6 or 8, 10, 11, etc. It goes like that. So if a person has monitored that the blood glucose level is something around, say suppose 90 deciliter, and she or he has administered something around 6 to 8 units of insulin, what happens? What I'm trying to tell you is that when the blood glucose concentration is not very high, and by chance the patient has been given a higher dose of insulin, immediately the blood sugar concentration starts falling. The blood glucose concentration starts becoming very low, and such type of a condition is known as insulin shock. Such type of a condition is known as insulin shock. What is insulin shock? Insulin shock is a condition when the blood glucose concentration has gone very low suddenly. Try to understand. I also told you that suppose we are taking 5 laddus and 6 gulab jamun, and after that we go for a blood test. Obviously the blood sugar is going to be high, but that should come back to something around 70 to 110 within a period of 2 hours if a person is not suffering from diabetes. If a person is suffering from diabetes, this number, or even if I talk about other numbers like 180 or 160 or 210, any of these numbers that the person has been detected for will not come back to normal within 2 to 3 hours, even after 5 years. It will be something little bit lesser only. But if a person is not suffering, it will very much come back to normal within 3 hours, and it should fall something around 70 to 110. This range mein aa jayega. That means a person is not suffering from diabetes. If it does not fall, a person is suffering from diabetes. So now, as I just now said, when a person is on insulin injections, and if the sugar concentration is lesser, something like 140, 150, and almost about 8 units are given. Yes, it happens. Very often it happens, even in hospitals also, where the nurses may just put at random 8 units, 10 units, and the person will start shivering also. The person may enter into convulsions also, because the blood sugar concentration going much beyond or lesser than 50 is a very dangerous situation. The person may also enter into coma. You understand coma, no? The person may also enter into coma where the brain stops functioning. So if the sugar concentration is a little bit higher, that's still nothing to be worried about. If the sugar concentration is much lesser, it's a very dangerous situation. So that is what we talk about as insulin shock. But again, I come back to this concept saying that normally when the sugar concentration is higher, and I said within 3 hours of time, 4 hours of time, it comes back to normal, then which hormone is doing this job? This hormone is being, or this job is being regulated by the hormone glucagon. So when the sugar concentration is higher in our body, and I said within 2 to 3 hours time, the sugar concentration is coming back to normal, which hormone is doing this? This particular function is also being regulated by glucagon. Meaning, if I understand that what is the job of glucagon then? What is the job of glucagon? In this condition, I will also talk about that if the sugar concentration now is much lesser, almost touching the threshold. If the sugar concentration is now coming to almost threshold, under normal conditions, I said that ye wale functions the insulin is carrying about and the sugar concentration is almost touching the threshold, but we are not eating food. Then how should the sugar concentration increase in the blood at that time? Now glucagon will take a note, start releasing the excess glycogen in the liver and break it down to glucose and put it in the blood, and this will again start increasing the glucose concentration. Because it may happen that we have taken our dinner and almost about 8 hours we are not eating, but in 3 hours time the glucose concentration is all absorbed, and the glucose in the blood is all absorbed by the body cells. In 4 to 5 hours time, all the glucose is getting over from the blood. Then what will happen by next day by 9 o'clock if you take breakfast? What will happen in this 5 hours time? The glucagon will take a care then even if you're not consuming anything, the glucose concentration in the blood is maintained. So what should I write? If I have to talk about insulin, which lowers the blood glucose level, then what should I write for glucagon? Raises the blood glucose level or increases the blood glucose level. It increases the blood glucose level. And how does it do so? The first job is this one. How does the glucagon raise the blood glucose level? This is the first step that it carries out. What it is? Breaking down the glycogen to glucose immediately and releasing the glucose into the bloodstream. Now the glucose concentration, which was very, very less or almost nil in the blood, has started raising up again. So now whenever we are talking about the job of glucagon and insulin, is it just the opposite? Yes. The glucagon and the insulin is just doing opposite roles. Hence, these two hormones are also known as antagonistic hormones. These are known as antagonistic because the function of insulin and glucagon is just the opposite of each other. So this is about the three endocrine glands, the major three endocrine glands. We are just a little bit left with adrenal gland. The next day we have to complete with this adrenal gland, and perhaps we'll start with sense organs and reproductive system only. You know the major chapters here.
Yes.
Okay.
Ma'am, can you repeat what glucagon and insulin are?
Glucagon
And insulin.
antagonistic hormones. They are antagonistic hormones, opposite in function. Go through the chapter. Okay, the exercise, did you try with the exercise in school? Did you finish with this? No. Then you make this, try this as homework. Huh? Just dekho. But of course, we'll discuss it in class also. Do you want pencil, please? A pencil then. Okay, just try this question, see if you are able to answer. B sub number 1. Now you may leave out adrenal questions because adrenal I haven't taught you. You can leave out those adrenal questions. B sub number 1, number 3. You may take, all of you. B sub number 1, number 3, number 4, number 6. Number 6, C sub number 1. C sub number 1. C sub number 4. C sub number 4. Okay, this many at least you try at home. See if you are able to solve this question. Take so.
Thank you.
अगर बॉलर पर बॉल वगैरह मैं बोल रहा ये जाना है